So the other day, I saw this crazy train surfing video on social media of people seeing how long they could cling to the roof of a moving train, and it honestly chilled me to the bone. Anyway, it made me wonder, did Japan back in the day have any of those hardcore, real-deal trials of guts like the old samurai used to do?
Oh, you bet they did. The samurai had some truly mind-boggling, totally wrecked trials of guts. Stuff like playing a laughing, drinking party version of Russian roulette. And man, I've got way more insane stories about those guys than you can handle. Want in?
Whoa, that sounds insanely messed up. I'm hooked. Tell me everything.
Alright, here we go.
The world pictures the samurai stoic warriors polishing their blades in absolute silence, living and dying by a noble code of honor. But wake up. The real samurai of Japan, specifically the Satsuma domain, nestled in the southern tip of Kyushu, completely transcended such romanticized fairy tales. They were living Mad Max warlords whose concept of compliance was utterly broken. Welcome to the insane, mind-bending world of Satsuma, a name that terrified everyone who heard it. First up is a crazed drinking game they called gun barrel roulette. As the booze flowed during banquets, getting rowdy wasn't enough for these men. They would hang a heavy, fully loaded matchlock rifle complete with live gunpowder and a burning slow match from a rope dangling right from the ceiling. They'd give it a violent spin, sending the loaded gun swinging back and forth over the center of the room. The air filled with the thick stench of gunpowder as the match slowly burned down. One wrong move, and a stray bullet would blow someone's brains out on the spot. Right underneath this live-fire roulette wheel, the men casually shared drinks and laughed out loud. Don't complain if you die, this is how we forge our guts. Treating the boundary between life and death like a sick joke, that was the kind of twisted mentality that ruled the room. Why on earth would they treat human life so recklessly? It wasn't just mindless, drunken vandalism. Located at Japan's southern frontier and constantly exposed to external threats and brutal environments, the entire Satsuma domain functioned as a single military fortress. For men living on borrowed time, fearing death was the ultimate sin. Laughing off fear and making death an everyday routine was their only way to preserve their sanity. By intentionally blurring the line between life and death to the absolute limit, they eradicated personal terror and forged an ironclad, fanatical collective combat power. Next comes the even more terrifying system that completely chained them from the roots: the summary execution rule. Back then, Satsuma had no modern courts, no objective evidence gathering, and no gentle safety nets like a police force. All that existed was absolute authoritarian power and a chilling ruthlessness that treated human life like scrap paper. If a lord or superior so much as glanced at you and thought, "You look a bit suspicious," or "Are you plotting something behind my back?" that was it. Even if you were entirely innocent with zero evidence against you, you were given not an ounce of a chance to defend yourself. There was no thorough interrogation, no time to offer an excuse, just a single, cold death sentence delivered straight to your face. You look suspicious. Commit seppuku. Once those words were dropped, these men didn't beg for mercy. They weren't even allowed to utter a single pathetic excuse. They simply nodded quietly, turned on their heels, and walked back to their own homes on their own 2 feet. Without a single person forcing them, they drove a blade deep into their own guts and collapsed into cold corpses on the spot. Yet, the most terrifying part of this system wasn't the brutality of the act itself. It was the fact that the lords who gave the order didn't even need to send guards or watchers to check whether the man actually killed himself. To a modern mind, if a condemned man knew nobody was watching, he'd run away into the dark of night or try to hide and survive. Self-preservation is a basic human instinct when your life is on the line. But the option to run away didn't even exist in the deepest corners of a Satsuma man's brain. The condemned man returned home of his own free will, unbound by anyone, and calmly drove a sword into his stomach all by himself. No guards were needed, orders were carried out perfectly, voluntarily, and without a fraction of hesitation.
Wait a minute, even without anyone watching, they'd willingly go cut their own bellies open. That's psychologically creepy beyond belief. They could have run away if they wanted to. So why on earth would they just die like they were told?
That's the horror of the foundational mechanism that drove Satsuma men insane. The moment you're suspected, your honor as a samurai is already dead in the dirt. Rather than live in disgrace, dying cleanly by your own hand is the only path. That conviction was soaked right down into the marrow of their bones. It wasn't about reluctantly obeying an order. They genuinely believed that choosing death for the sake of one's own pride, rather than being killed by another, was the ultimate aesthetic for a man. The absolute nature of the organization and the maintenance of purity took total precedence over their own lives. Modern laws and compliance concepts couldn't hope to stand a chance against the hardcore mental universe that ruled that society.
Thus, men snuffed out their own lives over the slightest suspicion, and those left behind coldly accepted it as just procedure. Individual human value was slashed to absolute zero, leaving only organizational logic and a clean death as absolute righteousness. That fanatical discipline and spirit of self-sacrifice became the explosive, unstoppable energy source for the Satsuma warriors who would soon shake the entire nation of Japan. Yet their madness didn't stop there. If you look at the educational system that formed the core of their society, utterly breaking and rebuilding the minds of their youth, the Goju education, your common sense will be completely pulverized. Young men in Satsuma were separated from their parents, living and eating with local seniors and peers under a fiercely strict hierarchy. They drilled in swordsmanship and mental conditioning from morning till night, but among all rules, one absolute law reigned supreme: never fear death, and under no circumstances return alive from a mission. Imagine the youngsters head out to a battlefield or a life or death mission, and by some stroke of luck, they successfully slay the enemy and return alive. In any normal country or organization, coming home safely would be met with praise and a warm welcome for surviving. But Satsuma's seniors and peers didn't possess an ounce of such soft common sense. What awaited those who came back alive wasn't a warm reception. It was a hellish roar of fury. Why the hell did you survive and come back? While your comrades were dying, you saved your own skin and crawled home instead of fighting to the death like a true soldier, you disgrace. And right after those words came a brutal, merciless storm of lynching and beatings. They had fought risking their lives and returned victorious, yet all that awaited them was a thorough thrashing and interrogation. Why didn't you die?
Hey, hold on a second. Lynching a comrade just for fighting for his life and coming back alive? That is completely psychotic. Isn't coming back alive a miracle and something to celebrate normally? What kind of upside-down world is that?
Hey, you're too soft. To them, surviving wasn't an honor at all, it was a mission failure and the ultimate shame. War means throwing yourself in with the resolve that everyone dies if you survive. It means someone else died in your place. Under the weight of that extreme responsibility and view of life and death, an individual's survival was nothing more than an ugly spectacle. The rules of their peers and seniors outweighed any higher order, creating a spine-chilling, cult-like solidarity that would make even modern criminal syndicates or yakuza look tame by comparison.
And the swordsmanship that most intensely embodied the personality and mentality of Satsuma men forged by this madness was none other than their ultimate, lethal art, Jigen-ryu. This wasn't just swinging a wooden sword around. They would attack thick, living tree trunks planted in their yards day after day, striking them thousands and thousands of times with every ounce of their soul, ignoring torn muscles and cracking bones. While normal swordsmanship polished techniques on how to deflect an enemy's blade, avoid fatal blows, and find openings, Jigen-ryu completely threw away those petty survival strategies. Its core philosophy was singular: put every ounce of your soul and physical being into the very first strike, the initial blow. Crush the enemy's helmet and skull with the first strike, slicing them straight through the body. Even if they missed and needed a second strike, that option didn't exist in their dictionary. There is no second strike. They didn't think about defense, escape routes, or self-preservation after surviving. Whether it hit or resulted in mutual destruction, everything was settled in that single opening blow, pouring their entire existence and mortality into that one microsecond. That was the true nature of Jigen-ryu. The personality and spirit of Satsuma men materialized in the form of a sword.
Settling everything with just the first strike. If you miss, you're just leaving yourself wide open to get killed. What a risky, completely unhinged way to fight.
Exactly. Which is why it's so terrifying. It's not swordsmanship for survival. You charge in with the resolve to crush the enemy while dying right alongside them. It's a strike that can only be unleashed by those who have stripped away all hesitation and terror from the very start. Back in the tumultuous days of Kyoto, even elite swordsmen like the Shinsengumi were utterly terrified when they encountered Satsuma men charging at them with bloodshot eyes, roaring Chesudo, using Jigen-ryu, whispering in genuine horror. Those aren't human beings, they're monsters born of madness. Just how powerful were these walking weapons back then? An incident in the late Edo period perfectly symbolizes their sheer might. The most insane, earth-shaking achievement of the era: the full-scale war against the British fleet in 1863, the Anglo-Satsuma War. Back then, Great Britain boasted the world's most powerful navy, colonizing territories all across the globe. Their mighty warships sailed right into Kagoshima Bay, straight to Satsuma's front doorstep. The reason? To demand compensation and the execution of the Satsuma samurai who had cut down an Englishman the previous year in the Namamugi incident. Any normal domain or country would have cowered and apologized profusely the second they faced the almighty British Empire, or simply caved to their demands. But this was the Satsuma domain, where every single screw in their heads was permanently loose. Instead of apologizing, they fired right back to hell with British demands. If it's a war they want, it's a war they'll get. And immediately shifted into full combat mode. The British side assumed, surely a tiny regional power in the East wouldn't dare point weapons at the world's greatest military. A little scare tactics and they'll surrender instantly. But once the battle began, that assumption was blown completely to dust. Satsuma lined the coast of Kagoshima Bay with artillery batteries and rained relentless cannon fire down on the British fleet. And they didn't just sit back and shoot. A ferocious storm was raging that day, but Satsuma's men roared, "Bad weather doesn't mean a damn thing. This is our chance to sink the enemy." Running around like madmen through the tempest, reloading cannons, scoring direct hits on the British flagship, and killing the enemy commander and captain. They sent shockwaves right through the world-conquering Royal Navy. In the end, Satsuma's castle town was badly scorched and heavily damaged by British naval bombardments. But the British side suffered unexpected casualties with their flagship hit and officers killed or wounded. Stunned by Satsuma's abnormal, battle-crazed ferocity, the British concluded, these guys aren't a proper army. Messing with them is suicide, and ultimately pulled back and retreated. Picking a fight with the entire world, refusing to yield an inch despite a massive disparity in resources, and actually holding their ground. That was the legendary proof of the raw madness and combat power possessed by the men of Satsuma.
Thus they laughed off death through extreme banquet games, willingly sliced open their own bellies at the mere whisper of suspicion, suffered beatings from their peers just for coming home alive, and charged enemy lines with the single-minded first strike of Jigen-ryu. Through such an abnormal environment and mindset, the men of Satsuma were forged. Why were they filled with such head-spinning, unbridled madness? Because living at the southern extremity of the country, constantly exposed to external threats and brutal environments, they had no choice but to survive an extreme reality where dying at any moment was a given. That utter lack of fear toward terror is precisely what shaped them into the ultimate fighting force of the late shogunate, and the driving force that ultimately turned Japanese history upside down. Behind the convenient, pretty illusions of serene Bushido fabricated by later generations, these men lived stained in blood and splinters of wooden swords. To the Japanese, their existence isn't merely that of past reckless outlaws. They represent an absolute readiness to throw everything away in times of crisis and a symbol of uncompromising strength, a haunting mixture of sorrow and awe permanently etched into the deepest corners of the human psyche.
Listening to all this makes late Edo Satsuma sound less like Japan and more like some hardcore sci-fi alien world. Anyone who had to actually cross swords with guys like that really drew the short straw.
Spot on. But precisely because such men existed, Japanese history was rocketed into hyperdrive. How many days do you think you'd survive in Satsuma's world? Let me know down in the comments. Catch you all in the next deep dive into the dark side of history.